Welcome to Light in the Shadow. I'm Dana Kenyon, and it's my aim to encourage, support, and equip women to live life under the shadow of God's wing. On this channel, I'll be bringing you videos of women who are doing just that. I hope their stories will help you find your path in His kingdom. Under His shadow is where we can walk in His protection, receive His provision, and rest in His care. Together, we will be light under the shadow of His wing. Okay, sorry. Okay. Welcome once again to Light in the Shadow. Today I get to interview my friend Denise Hammer, whom I love very much. Denise is from Laurel, Montana, and she is the founder and director of Mercy Market. Denise, what's Mercy Market?
Mercy Market is a ministry that is designed to help women and families in desperate situations by providing a marketplace for the goods that they make. And then the money that they earn from that goes back to help sustain them, really basic life needs, and in some cases, protect women from being exploited or bring restoration to those who have been.
Yes, it's such an amazing ministry, and I love it so much. Denise and I first met at a women's conference in Billings, Montana, where she had a table set up with merchandise on it. And I think it was at that time that God just gave me a heart for this ministry. And it wasn't long after that I asked for some boxes of goodies to sell in our church. And we had a big, what we called a world bazaar.
Yeah, and I remember that.
We had tables set up and like, what are those things? Those like tent things set up over the tables to make it look like different areas from around the world. And so we had like 5 continents represented. And it was a lot of fun. And we invited people from the community to come. And so it was really fun. We sold a lot of stuff that day and it was a lot of fun. So then later we had another women's retreat in 2014, I believe. And one of the representatives from Mercy Market actually came to our church and manned a table, woman to table.
There you go.
And just sold stuff then as well. And so I love Mercy Market. I love the ministry. I love the mission. I love that you do this. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We are going to have fun. Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a couple of ways that Mercy Market does sell products. You know, you sent me the boxes of stuff where I could sell them in my own church. Mm-hmm. We talked about coming to a church and setting up a table and selling stuff for some kind of a special event. What are some other ways that you sell stuff?
We do have an online store now. That's what we did during our COVID year where we couldn't get out to any events. And so we really beefed up our online store. So anybody that is interested in supporting women, giving them the help they need to care for their families, they can go online. And we have quite a few products on mercymarket.org. But like you said, Dana, we love to attend events. We're going to be coming to the ladies retreat, a couple of them in March and April. And if it's not too far to travel, we do enjoy doing that ourselves. But a way to really get the work of Mercy Market around the nation is by these box events that you said. So if some woman has a craft fair in their town, we'll send her a box or two. We'll pay for the table fee. She sets it up, sells what she sells, and can really make a difference in her work that day. We do also find, though, that church events and like ladies retreats, missionary conferences, those are the best ways for us to sell. So if the women that are watching this program are at all interested, we'd love to help partner with them to work at some of those events.
Yes, please do. Please, and we'll have some information up at the end of this video telling you how you can contact Mercy Market, telling you their web address and all that kind of stuff for their online store. So hopefully this will get the word out about Mercy Market a little bit better. So, okay, well, let's get into it. I know, my friend, I'm going to get this one out of the way first.
All right.
Because I think it's just a fun fact, okay? We talked a little bit about, and I know you don't want to be a name dropper, but we
Oh,
talked a little bit about your brother, John. Who's your brother, John?
my brother John is John Stumbo, who presently is the president of the Christian Missionary Alliance. That's the denomination that my family grew up in. My dad was a preacher. Both my brothers were preachers, my brother-in-laws, and so we've been in that denomination for a long time. And my little brother John is now the president of the denomination.
The president. I think that's so awesome because I knew you for, I don't know, several years before I knew that that was a connection. So your brother John is the president of the denomination. You started Mercy Market, but you also have another brother who is pretty involved in ministry. Can you tell us about that?
I'd love to. So my older brother is Jim, and he's been very involved with ministry to Mexico, working with Pastor Tomas and working with indigenous people in the surrounding communities in the Copper Canyon. An awesome ministry that we've got to be a part of a couple times, gone down with him, that he takes trips with anybody that wants to go a couple times a year and is partnering with the work down there.
Yes, yes. Our church here in Gillette have taken trips down there with him. So it's pretty
Yeah.
exciting. Okay, so those are your siblings. I got that out of the way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, let's
Yeah.
back up just a little bit more. Tell me
Okay.
about your childhood a little bit. You told me that you're a pastor's kid. So talk about that a little bit.
I grew up in the Midwest. My dad was a pastor, and I grew up mostly in Minnesota. And I'm number 5 of 6 kids. We were real involved in Bible camps as a part of Dad's ministry. And I am sorry that for some people this is not the case, but being a pastor's kid for me was a really great experience. I never felt like my parents put ministry in front of their family. Of course, there's problems in every family. No family's perfect, but for me, it was a really great upbringing and introducing me to Bible camps. So I just love Bible camp and introducing me to missions in a way more so than just being a part of a congregation, because we had the missionaries in our house all the time, and so that just really fostered that interest in in the world, in the global community, and it was a real joy. I'm grateful for that heritage.
That's cool. So we talked about the fact that you were raised in a white middle class upbringing.
Yeah, I really was. In my small Midwestern town, I was just not aware of what was going on in the rest of the world. Didn't know about deep poverty issues, for example, that maybe weren't that far from me. I only lived, like an hour from the Twin Cities, but I just was really in this little world that had an impact on me for years to come.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to get into that a little bit later and how God kind of changed your worldview. Not kind of,
Right.
but
Yeah,
changed your
right.
worldview.
Exactly.
So you grew up in this church setting, and you talked about it being kind of an evangelical culture, and that maybe there was a little hole in what you in your doctrine.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that we can take things away from our upbringing that were not necessarily ever taught, ever preached, whether or not your dad was a preacher, ever, maybe even other siblings within your family didn't come away with the same message. But I came out of my community, my upbringing, with this as the book Hole in the Gospel. I came to find out there was a book, The Hole in the Gospel, that was influential in my life later on. But I really grew up believing in this evangelicalism, faith-based, you were saved by faith, not by works. Emphasis on holiness and living a life pleasing to God. But there seemed to be, even though my mom was modeling things, I don't know quite how I missed it, but that there was an equal part of God's heart that cared for the basic needs and meeting the physical needs of people, not just the spiritual needs.
Yes. Yeah. What age do you think you were when you started realizing that maybe there was something a little missing in your
In my
gospel?
mid-50s,
Yeah.
that's when the real transformation took place. Seeds were being watered, I'm sure, as I look back and look at my mom and dad's example, but the real heart transformation, eye-opening, took place in my
In
mid-50s.
your 50s. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's move back again. At some point during, after your childhood, you went away to Bible college. Where did
Yep.
you go? What
Went
was
to St. Paul Bible College, which is now Crown College outside of St. Paul.
okay?
And I got a bachelor's degree in Christian education. From there, I went on and worked at a radio station in Great Falls, Montana,
Mhm.
and then married my college sweetheart. And we moved out to the Yellowstone Boys Ranch. Now it's the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch, where we were house parents. We had 12 troubled boys under our care. And at that time, you lived in the same unit as the kids did. And then they moved on to having all shift workers. And by that time, we had our own children. So I stepped out of the role, but my husband is still there all these decades later.
That's a long time.
It
That's a long
is.
time. So that's amazing. That's a long time
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
ministering to those kids. So God bless him.
Being
So
very faithful to
so
that
then
calling.
I'm sorry.
Oh, he's just being very faithful to that calling.
Absolutely. Yes, that's for sure. So when you stepped away, then what did you do with all of your free time?
Right, all that free time. We have 4 children and they're all about 2 years apart, and we decided to homeschool until they hit 5th grade. So I spent a lot of years just being at home, directly involved in every step of their lives for those years. Also taught piano lessons, been involved in church ministry, usually music some way, Bible studies. And then once my kids got to high school and started being involved in the high school musical, then I got to be part of that as well. So I was the assistant director for the high school musical in Laurel for about 18 years.
How fun.
Oh,
That's
it was fun. Yeah, it was a
that's
good ride.
really
Yeah.
fun. 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls,
Yep. 2 boys, two
correct?
girls.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And you said they're 2 years apart.
Yeah.
But we talked about the fact that your kids were, getting up there and moving on and graduating and stuff. You talked about a book or a Bible study, I guess, by John Piper called "Don't Waste Your Life." And what was it about that Bible study that spoke to you at that time in your life?
I think there were these different components that were all happening at the same time, which is often, I think, how God works. So I had a change in my available time, and with the kids leaving and going on to college, and ministry opportunities, that were more opening for that. Reading in church, we had a Sunday school class, and it was the John Piper book, Don't Waste Your Life, just that theme, just that idea. And then at the same time, I'm continuing my habit of reading the scripture, but I'm seeing for the first time, and really did feel like the very first time, that from cover to cover, there is this very strong message that God cares deeply for the physical needs of the poor and needy.
Yes, yes. So I just wanted to touch on this point for just a moment because yes, that is in the scripture and you found that out by this habit, as you said,
Yeah.
of reading scripture daily through your life. And I know that was one of the things that you said to me, that if you had the opportunity to give people encouragement or
Mhm.
advice, that's what you would tell them, is to get into the scripture on a daily basis.
Yeah, it really came out of a habit that I already had established. So it's not like you woke up one day and said, "Oh God, what do you want me to do?" And he just dropped the idea. I was reading, I was being faithful to what I knew to do. And I think that's a key point. And then in the reading of the scripture, as I'm starting to see this continual theme, now I'm starting to say, Lord, what do you want me to do with that? What do you want me to do with this? And I believe that as we ask that, as we interact with God in the scripture, that he will answer us. If in his timing, in his way, it will mean something different for you, as obviously what you've chose, what God's called you to do in that next season of your life. But I do believe that he'll be faithful if we have been in that habit of being in his word and listening to what he would say to us.
Amen. Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly about that. Yes. So here you are, you're reading the scripture and you're asking God, okay, what do you have for me now that my kids are growing and leaving the nest?
Yeah.
And then you told me about being on the mission committee and meeting with a couple of the pastors from your church. Tell us about that and how that kind
Yeah.
of all transformed everything.
So I'm asking God and I'm reading and I'm wondering what that would mean for me. And I can't remember exactly why I was meeting with our pastor and youth pastor, who I know has a special place in your heart. But we were down at the Rocket Burrito downtown Billings. And that's the only time I ever remember being there or ever remember meeting with those guys, but
Wow.
and the pastor's wife. But I think we were talking about, well, now I'm on the missions committee. Could like maybe once a month we do something tangible to help. Like I think Vision Beyond Borders was collecting glasses or blankets or something. Could we do that? And then maybe next month we could do this. And so I was thinking of more missions committee, church, what can we do? And I'm sitting there and it was like, oh, or maybe, no, I couldn't do that. Oh, maybe you would want now. Oh, are you saying something to me, God, here? And that really is where I just got the idea. And it wasn't the first time anybody ever got this kind of idea, but it was the first time for me that maybe I could buy products that women were making and I could sell them and I could get that money back to them some way and help them meet those tangible physical needs that now I was learning God really cared about so much.
Awesome. Yes. And really on a more personal level, not so much the ministry in the church, but on a personal level.
Yes, exactly. Right.
Okay. And so as we talked earlier, you were telling me about starting Mercy Market by connecting with the head of Comma Services. Now, Comma is
Right.
Compassion and Mercy Associates, right?
Yes. And at that time, Phil Skelly was the director. He has passed on to glory, but he had a great impact on me at our beginning. And so I knew that my mom had given me an apron from Laos that was part of Comma Crafts. And then my brother Jim, he was the international liaison between Kosovo, where women were making doilies in order to feed their families. Kosovo had just gone through the war, and this was a way that women could truly feed their families by making doilies. So he was the person that they'd all send their doilies to, and then he would call churches and say, would you be willing to sell doilies at your church? So I knew I could get doilies. I knew I could get aprons. And so then I called the Comma office, and that's how I got to meet Phil and also find out about a few other things that at that time Alliance workers were doing. One was Impressions, who we still get to partner with, jewelry from Turkey that now is the purchase of that jewelry is helping refugees. And then I also heard about Joan Ewan, a missionary in Ecuador, who had a ministry with women in prison in Quito. So those were kind of my beginning groups that I was able to get product and sell for.
Nice. So God already had the very beginnings of it all set up for you. He provides, he calls and he provides. So how did you get it funded? How did you start financially?
Yeah. So I asked my husband and my church for some seed money, and I'm not sure if I ever paid my husband back. We'll have to figure that out. But I know for the church it was a loan, and then they allowed me to use at the beginning like church treasury. I would put the money in the church, and then they would write me the check, and then I would cash a check, and then I'd order something else, and then it was just So, and finally the treasurer was like, I don't think this is really the best way to go about this. And it wasn't. And Phil had advised me pretty early on that this shouldn't be a hobby. It should be a business, treat it like a business.
Yeah.
And so that had benefited me in a couple of ways. One, then I set up an LLC. And as a side, we are not a nonprofit. Nonprofit has some great benefits, but it also has some restrictions. And so at this point, we are still not a nonprofit. So you can't get a tax receipt from us if you give a donation, is basically what that means.
Right.
But he encouraged me to treat it as a business. And so we set up an LLC, separated family finances, separated from the church finances, but then also really advised me in how I would charge people for the product. And so one example that I know I've shared with you is, so we pay for everything up front.
Yes.
And that includes shipping, and that includes items that never sell or are broken or are moldy. And one time we got a box, and it had come from a village high up in Thailand. And I know that when they boxed up that product, they set it on the back of the truck. And then that truck drives it 4 hours down to where now it sits on the dock of a ship, waiting for the ship to send it out. And in all of that process, I'm sure it just got rained on. They have heavy rains. And so when it got to us, it was all moldy because it was stuffed animals and purses and cloth. Who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
If it had been a hobby, if I was just like trying to, well, it cost me $2 to get that bracelet, so I'll charge you $2. Who's going to pay for the shipping? Who's going to pay for that $200, $300 box of items that were, moldy? So from the early on beginning, we established it as a business. We write into the price things like shipping and expenses of traveling, of getting it to you, and so forth. But that was great advice.
Well, the other thing that came from that is that when you bought the product from the person, they got their money right away. They didn't have to wait for you to sell the product and then get them back their money. So that was another benefit.
Yes, absolutely right. We felt like that was just the right way to do it, so that they're not waiting, or in this case, now, even though they've done all the work and they have this great need, it's not their fault that it got moldy.
Right.
But now were they not going to get the money? So that's written into our cost. On the other hand, Phil Skelly advised me to not get into sympathy sales.
Yes.
Don't handle products that the only reason someone would buy them is because they feel sorry for the person who's making them. And so high quality has been a necessity at the beginning for the products that we carry. And that has done very well. I was in Ecuador, and a woman representing some of the prison women came with a bag full of products they had made. And these women are in desperate situations, and maybe we'll talk about that more later, but they were desperate for additional income. And so they had crocheted some things and stitched some things. And as she spread them all out, I looked at each item and thought, nobody at a craft fair would buy this. It's poorly made, and it won't hold up its own. Maybe some nice Christian woman would say, oh, I feel so sorry for her. I'll buy it. I won't give it to anybody. I won't use it. But that would be an example of sympathy sales. And the woman representing the prisoners even said, well, don't you feel sorry for them? And I said, yes, I do. And I will contribute to what they need, and I will help them personally. Yes. But this isn't the quality of product that will be sustainable for us as a ministry for a long haul. And that's really what we are trying to do, is to be as a ministry sustainable so that they can be sustainable. But also it's important, and we've not run into this hardly at all, but it's important that they know that there's a quality of standard and to rise to that.
How did you come up with the name Mercy Market?
Well, so by now I knew I had this ministry that I was interested in. I knew I wanted to sell. And I was sitting at a friend's house. Our daughters were friends. She had gone over to Thailand, which is how we actually learned about the group that they got moldy products from. Um, and we were sitting around her table, and I was like, I got to come up with a name. And I had been to Africa when I was in college. And so I'd been in some of those open air markets, and I just kept thinking about the marketplace of where people go to buy and where their goods are being sold. And so I really like that picture of an open air market. But our heart is to show the mercy and the kindness and the compassion of God. And so as we sat there at the table, it's like, market, huh? This, that. And finally it was like, oh, mercy market. And so that has been our logo. And a gentleman from my church at that time made me this little sign. It hangs in our room now. And but that's how it started. Just wanting it to represent a place where you purchase and sell your products, but it is to extend the mercy and the compassion of God. We exist to extend mercy to a hurting world through the sale of international products. So that's why we exist.
Tell me how many countries you are working with, how many groups of different people groups that you're working with as Mercy.
Currently, we have about 23 groups in 17 countries.
Wow. Your target is to meet basic life needs of these women. You're not trying to send somebody to college, or you're not training pastors or sending them Bibles, but you are trying to meet these basic needs of women who are trying to help their families, correct?
Exactly. As we started to grow and people would hear about us, then others would say, well, have you heard about my uncle? He's helping so-and-so in this country. And then we'd hear about somebody else. Do you want to partner with them? And so we learned kind of early on that we needed to define who we were going to help. We had to get some parameters around how we were going to use our energies, because we were at the time and still are a volunteer group. Yes. And so nobody was working full-time, getting a full-time wage so we had to really be careful to guard the energies and the resources that we had. And also, to just kind of define what our mission was going to be. So we decided pretty early on a couple of things. And one was that the groups that we wanted to help, individuals we wanted to help, either were being rescued from trafficking, had to do with the sexual trafficking industry. So we have some groups that are specifically geared around that, or individuals that were in desperate poverty and needed an assistance, not a handout, but a hand up, as people like to say, needed assistance in meeting basic life needs, keeping families together. So the women didn't have to leave their children in a village with a grandmother, for example, and go hours away. And even if she could find some kind of a respectable job, which was often not the case and often led to the sexual exploitation, even if she could find something decent, there was still this fragmentation of families. And so based on poverty. And so we wanted to also help families stay together and meet the basic life needs through the work that the women could do with their hands.
Yes. Yeah. You said that there was a spiritual component to this as well.
Yes, so that was the other thing. So we targeted, like you said, we had our target group now, who we were going to help and how that was going to look. And so while there were many other wonderful ministries going on, and you mentioned some of those, helping people get Bibles, helping kids go on to college, build a church building. Those are all wonderful ministries. That just wasn't going to be our focus. Right. And then, but also we knew we weren't getting into this, and we didn't want to do this strictly from a humanitarian standpoint, that if you meet everyone's physical needs, but you never are able to meet or offer to meet a spiritual need, then you've only helped them for this side of eternity. And so we've always tried to be sure that there's been a spiritual component to the groups that we work with.
Yes, not requiring anything of the women, but just making sure that there's somebody along the way that has the opportunity to share with them about the gospel.
Absolutely. And we know that looks different in different countries. In some countries, They can be having Bible studies with those women. They can be inviting them to church. They can be asking their kids, inviting their kids to Bible classes. And then you go all the way from that to where you're restricted. You can't speak about Jesus. You can't talk about religion of any kind when you're meeting with the women in like a center for where they make jewelry or something like that. You are very, very restricted in what you say, but there's always, to the best of our ability, there's always a believer who's somewhere along the process that can build a relationship that if the question is asked, and this is what Phil Skelly would say, if the question was asked, why are you doing this? The answer is because of Jesus. And there's a bridge that you can build now to build that relationship, to create that opportunity to speak of Jesus and offer spiritual food and spiritual life as well as physical.
Yes, because as Mercy Market, you can't be that component. There's too many different languages spoken. There's too many currencies involved. And so Mercy Market, you're not in those countries, but these people are. So that was very wise counsel as well. That was a very good component to add to that, just to make sure that there's somebody along the way that can do that for these women. So you talked about it not being a full-time endeavor.
Right.
You have a team, but it's not something that you, like you said, nobody's getting a full-time paycheck, and you had other things in your life at that time, your own family, your own ministry at your church, and those kinds of things that you wanted to be involved in. You also talked about the fact that you and the women on your team needed to develop your own spiritual lives as well. This isn't a full-time thing, and yet, and that's why I liked what you did for us. You sent us boxes of product that we could, because you can take a box down to the post office and mail it to a church and let us do the work, of selling it. Or, one of you could go if you're close enough, and, that kind of stuff. So I really liked that you were trying to very carefully keep track of the time involved.
Yeah, we, none of us on the team, and just as a little side, so when I started, it was, of course, just me. And then early on, God brought a younger gal who saw my lack of technological and artistic abilities. And she lived 4 hours away, but she was young and enthusiastic and passionate. And oh man, she brought such a great voice to the table, and so many skills and ways of thinking about things. And then from there, then God moved, and literally moved a woman from Wyoming to our church in Montana. And I had just gotten back from one of my trips to Quito, Ecuador, and I was giving this passionate talk because some of what I saw in Ecuador just gripped my heart well, as we've said, I grew up in this pretty white middle class community, and I saw poverty and destitution for the first time in this women's prison in Quito, like I had never seen. So I was giving this impassionate talk in Sunday school, and I think it was her first time there. But as a result, God laid it on her heart to be part of our team. And then others joined us, and it just seemed to be on this trajectory of getting bigger and bigger, and we were doing more sales every year. And then it plateaued, and then it started, people moved, and people got sick, and God called them to other ministries. And now it's down to 2 of us.
Yeah.
Pretty much. We have a couple pastors' wives that are still involved, but that's been an interesting process. And to continually say, God, you called me to this. I'm just going to go through the doors that you've led me through. I'd like to see it grow, but I am called to be faithful to what he's asked me to do and leave the results with him. And that is hard. That is hard because we so often think that big is better, and more sales means helping more women, but it also looks like God is really blessing your business now or your ministry, your efforts. But if it's little, if it's less than last year, then sometimes it's hard to stay faithful in that, in those small things. And yet I believe that this is what he's called me to, but only one of the things he's called me to.
Yes.
I'm now a grandma. That was Mercy Market started in 2008.
Yes.
And so my life has gone through changes, of course, like all of ours do, the seasons of life. That was 14 years ago. I've aged 14 years, and
You don't
now I
look
have
like it.
thank you. And I have 3 grandkids that live a block away.
Oh,
And and ministries at church continue to be there. And I have a husband and I have a house. And so there are all these other callings in our lives. And I know that's true for everybody. And so the challenge is to remain faithful to what God has called you to and keep checking the balance. Am I given enough here? Am I working hard enough at this place, or too hard here? And just keep seeking the Lord to keep that balance.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. So let's back up to Ecuador again, because that was kind of a defining time for you.
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about what you experienced when you walked into that Ecuadorian prison for women.
So I had just started Mercy Market. I had heard about Joan Ewan, who was working with prisoners in the women's prison, and she had found out that, well, to back up, in many countries, prison systems are family based, and so they assume that if you're in prison, that the family is going to come and meet many of your basic needs. They obviously are. You've got a roof over your head and fence around you, and they provide a little bit of food. But if you have need for feminine hygiene products, if you have a need for more food, maybe there's a shortage because there's extra prisoners, if you need another blanket, that they expect your family to take care of that. And in this women's prison, there were many, many women who did not come from Quito.
Yeah.
Some were even from other countries. And so these women were in such destitute situations that they were selling themselves to the guards so they could have money to pay for stamps, to send letters back to their kids, for a phone call so they could call home, for feminine hygiene products. And, it was just unthinkable. And so Joan started working with them, making greeting cards.
Ah,
So that's what we sold for them. So then I was still doing solo at the time. I went in to the prison and met some of these women. And when I walked through those gates, and for me, it was the
oh,
noise, the nonstop 24/7 noise, women screaming, women yelling, women fighting, women singing, women, just music blaring. And there was no quiet place. There was no safe place. There was just angst all around, and noise, and the destituteness of, that's not a real big word, but the desperate situation that those women were in. I was just overwhelmed by it. I couldn't hardly believe that people could live there. So had spent a few hours a couple times during that time I was there. And so of course, I didn't know what it was like to live there, but I had this sense of the lack of privacy, the conflict, the constant angst and arguments and fighting and solicitation and just the horrificness of trying to survive in a place like that. So then I purchased some wooden nativity sets when I was in the market, so that I could come home and sell and send the money back to help that ministry. And we were all getting lined up to, walk through the airport security or whatever. And the rest of them were in the waiting room, and they asked me to come with them. So here I am being trotted off with Spanish speaking police security. I'm taken down the steps. The rest of the group is out there in the waiting room. I'm kind of like, oh, do you see what's happening to me? They come down. I get down under the belly of the airport, you know, like I'm down below the plane. They have my bags and they're talking to me in Spanish and the dogs are sniffing. And I've heard stories, and because there's a few women that were in this prison who were mules, they didn't know that they were transporting drugs.
Oh,
And now most of them knew, but there were a few. So I've heard of stories of that. And I have these wooden items and they're saying to me, you know, are these yours? Yes, they are. And the dogs are sniffing. And I had this like brief moment of what if somehow I was, you know, somebody had snuck a drug anyway, and I ended up in that prison. And I just remember the panic washing over me, like I could never survive. How
oh,
could you survive in that noise? And well, I mean, it was like 2-second fear. I also knew that nobody had talked to me and hadn't made arrangements to drop anything off with anybody, but just that sense of horror at what if I ended up there. I would be desperate for somebody to help me.
yeah.
And that was pretty impactful, just having experienced that, seeing it, knowing how desperate they were, and how would I survive if my
Oh,
story in a different turn.
yeah. Oh my goodness. You didn't share that with me before. So
I
I'm
know
like,
I did it. I
oh,
just remembered that now, but it was impacting.
yes, I'm sure. You talked about an analogy that Gary Drake made one time. I'm not sure
Yes,
if that was in a book or what, but
it
about
was in the back of a newsletter. Gary Drake for a while was the president of or whatever they call him, the director of the Montana Rescue Mission here in Billings. And so I was getting their newsletters. And one time he wrote in a newsletter about um, if you broke your arm and you went into the emergency room, they're not going to ask you, how did you break it? Like to find fault. Like, was it your fault that you broke it?
yeah,
Because if it was your fault, then we won't treat you, would be the continuation of that thought. And
yes,
his point was that people have a physical need, whether or not it's their fault, they have that need. Now, I know we can get into subjects about enabling. I know I read an awesome book. I think everybody should read it, When Helping Hurts.
mm,
And there are ways to help people that really do end up hurting them.
oh,
But like these women in prison, yes, it was because they knowingly carried drugs into the country that now they were in prison. Does that mean that now they should have to sell their bodies in order to get feminine hygiene products?
oh, yeah,
No, and so we have to be wise. We continue when we especially get new groups. We're trying to make sure that we are doing what really is a help to them, not creating a dependency. We
yeah,
did have one missionary tell us that they, for a period of time, were no longer going to be helping doing like selling crafts because it was leading to an unhealthy dependence. It was leading to an unhealthy expectation of, you'll do this for us, we won't. Anyway, we just have to be wise and be aware that yes, at times people have to suffer the consequences of their behavior,
mhm,
but in this most cases that doesn't, I mean, we still need to feed them
yep,
and care for them. And so
yes, absolutely,
but
absolutely.
that was the Gary Drake thing. And if you tend like I can be to be a little judgmental or a little, like, well, you shouldn't have done that, then you wouldn't have had that problem.
Mm,
That was a really good word for me.
yes, I'm sure it is for me. That's, yeah. Okay, well, that was before you had a team, then you got a team, not that you were looking for a team, but
Right.
God kind of brought that along. And you said that he was so faithful at opening doors for you and
Yeah.
that you just walked through them. And so God is still opening doors for you.
Yeah.
You're still walking through doors. And I can't help but think about the year 2020 and COVID. Now,
Mhm.
how did COVID affect Mercy Market?
Well, our whole ministry at that point was based on events where people gather. And so we had like probably a 90% loss of sales. Maybe
Oh.
that's a little high, but at least for the first 8-9 months. But also for many a year, we had been talking about really developing an online store. And so Sherry, my partner, who is much more technologically gifted than I will ever be, she really set to creating an online store. We had a minimal presence. I think we had like 40 items online. Now we have hundreds. And
Yes.
so that is where we spent our energies, and I'm just thrilled with where that's at and what that offers to women who maybe don't even know about us, or they were at an event and they didn't have the resources at the time, or there's all kinds of reasons why you would go online. Women now that are watching this and thinking, oh, I never heard of them, or oh, Mother's Day is coming up, rather than going to Walmart, maybe I should look at Mercy Market. Rather than putting my money somewhere else, I could buy something that benefits other women. So it really upped our presence online. So that was the like benefit, or how the good that came out of it for us as a ministry. But also the thing that blessed us was, because God had been so faithful up to that point, we were able to say to all of our partners, I know you're not able to sell product right now. How, at least, for other people to sell, can we bless you financially? And he had given us enough reserve to be able to do that. And that was a real joy.
Yes, I can't imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
The blessing of just being able to say, okay, here, let me
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
Because it was a horrible global, crisis.
Yeah.
So what a wonderful thing to be able to do. Thanks for watching today's episode of Light in the Shadow. Be sure to subscribe to this channel so that you can watch future videos. God bless.